The morning rain had just softened into a mist when Layla Brooks arrived at the wrought iron gates of the Calloway Estate. Her coat, too thin for the late winter chill of upstate New York, clung damply to her shoulders. The rideshare driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, as if double-checking she hadn't entered the wrong address. But no. She was exactly where she needed to be. She stepped out of the car, with a leather-bound folder in hand and shoes that had seen too many cracked sidewalks. Her breath clouded in the cold as she stared up at the long gravel driveway, flanked by maples stripped bare by winter. Somewhere beyond those trees, the mansion awaited, along with the kind of opportunity she hadn't dared dream of in years. Not as an architect. Not anymore. Not since her mother passed, and the world shifted from ambitious to survival. Now, she was just a woman applying to clean floors in a home she might have once been hired to design. The service entrance was hidden behind a trellis of ivy, elegant even in its utility. Layla knocked, straightened her spine, and exhaled quietly. She was still wearing the last of her confidence like perfume, faint but present. A moment later, the door opened with a mechanical click, revealing a woman in a navy suit and perfectly polished loafers. "You're early," the woman noted without warmth. "But I suppose punctuality is a virtue." "I figured early was better than late," Layla offered with a soft smile. Follow me." The woman introduced herself as Margaret Pierce, the estate's house manager for over 15 years. Layla followed her through pristine back hallways, past walls adorned with minimalist art that likely cost more than her student loan debt. Everything was curated, precise, like the kind of life that never had to worry about overdue utility bills or expired insurance cards. Margaret stopped abruptly and turned. "Your resume is unusual. A master's in urban planning and environmental design from Columbia?" Layla nodded, already preparing for the question she'd been answering for months. "So why housekeeping?" "Because sometimes," she said gently, "you do what you have to, not what you're meant to, just to keep moving." There was a pause. Margaret studied her face, and for a split second, something softened in the older woman's expression. Then it vanished as quickly as it came. "This estate has rules. You'll be expected to maintain discretion and avoid the third floor entirely. That includes the East Wing. Mr. Calloway values privacy above all else. Understood?" They moved again, and Layla caught glimpses of open spaces, sunken lounges, marble fireplaces, ceilings that seemed to stretch into the sky. Every architectural detail tugged at the part of her that still dreamed in lines, angles, and natural light. And then they arrived at the conservatory. The moment the doors opened, Layla's breath hitched. It was a marvel of glass and steel, alive with winter-hardy plants that clung to light like a promise. The structure curved like a cathedral of nature, intentional, precise, and bold. It was the kind of space she used to sketch when she believed her designs would shape skylines. "This is Mr. Calloway's sanctuary," Margaret said, her voice quieter. "You'll clean it every morning before sunrise. No exceptions." Layla stepped inside as if entering a sacred place. Her fingertips grazed the edge of a planter. Even in the cold, it smelled like green things pushing toward bloom. She could have stayed there all morning. But then, footsteps, sharp, measured, echoing off marble. Layla turned, and for the first time, she saw him, Ethan Calloway. He was taller than she expected, not in the exaggerated way magazines painted billionaires, but in how a tree might be tall, rooted, composed, self-contained. His tailored coat was still buttoned, dark wool against the paleness of his skin. His gaze, a winter gray, held hers for a second too long. "Margaret," he greeted with a nod. "Mr. Calloway?" she replied. His eyes moved to Layla. She felt them like a weight on her skin. "You must be the new staff member." "Yes, sir." "Layla Brooks." "Layla." He said her name slowly, testing how it felt in his mouth. "What brought you to my door?" Her answer was steady. A desire to work, and a need to keep dreaming. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. "Good," he said. "Welcome to Hawthorne Ridge." And then he was gone. But the air hadn't settled yet. There are moments in life that arrive quietly, without fanfare, but split your path like lightning in a dark sky. For Layla, this was one of them. A girl with too much debt and too little privilege had just entered a world where power wore polished shoes and spoke in silences. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her presence was about to unravel a life built on control. And in its place, love would begin to bloom. Quietly, unexpectedly. And that is just the beginning. If you've ever believed that love can grow in the most unlikely places, between silence and sunlight, between what we do and who we are, this story is for you. Like, comment, and follow Love and Twilights for the next chapter of Layla and Ethan's journey. Because sometimes, sweeping floors leads to something far greater than what we ever planned. The days at Hawthorne Ridge fell into a quiet rhythm, not unlike a piano playing the duplicate keys repeatedly, beautiful in its order, stifling in its perfection. Layla learned the pattern of the estate swiftly, which corridors creaked, which lights flickered for a second before glowing steadily, which windows caught the early sun just right. It was a choreography, and she danced it alone. Before the frost had melted off the grass each morning, she entered the conservatory with a bucket, a cloth, and a part of herself she hadn't touched in years. The plants there seemed to breathe, and she, in turn, exhaled. Sometimes she hummed softly while dusting the leaves. Sometimes she stood still, watching the light crawl across the tiled floor like a lover returning home. Ethan Calloway rarely appeared during those hours, but when he did, it was never without effect. He entered the room as though it were part of him, not a possession, but an extension of his solitude. Layla would hear the sound of leather soles brushing marble, and something inside her would still. She never turned too quickly, never looked too long, until one morning when he spoke without preamble. "You trimmed the ficus." She glanced up from the orchid bed, surprised. "I did." It was starting to droop forward under its weight. His eyes flicked to the plant, then back to her. "Not many would have noticed that. I'm not most people." A beat passed. Then, the faintest curve of his lips. Clearly, that was all. He walked away, disappearing into the eastern corridor, leaving behind the echo of something that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't dismissal either. That night, Layla found herself sketching. It was unintentional at first. A spare napkin beside her modest dinner, a pen from the supply drawer. But the lines emerged quickly. A greenhouse expansion, a hybrid structure of metal and wood. She hadn't drawn like that since graduation, since her mother's funeral. She folded it and tucked it into her coat before she could talk herself out of it. The next morning, Ethan was already in the conservatory when she arrived. He had removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and stood over a pot of rosemary, the soil dark and fragrant. His hair, usually combed with surgical precision, was slightly askew, as if his hands had distracted themselves by running through it. "Miss Brooks." "Mr. Calloway." He gestured to a nearby stool. "Would you join me?" She hesitated, not because she feared proximity, but because something about him always felt like standing near a fault line. unmoving until it suddenly wasn't. Still, she walked over and sat. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he traced the edge of a leaf between thumb and forefinger. "I looked up your thesis," he said quietly. She blinked. "I didn't realize it was still online." "It is. Urban renewal through biophilic integration." A mouthful, but rather brilliant. Layla laughed, dry and surprised. "That paper got me exactly nowhere. Only because no one wanted to imagine cities that heal instead of divide," he said. "That's not your failure. That's theirs." She looked at him then, and noticed the thinness around his eyes for the first time. Not exhaustion, exactly, but a kind of bruised detachment, like someone who had seen too much from too far away. "I had dreams," she admitted softly, almost to herself. "Do you still?" "Sometimes. But now, I mostly have bills." There was a silence, not empty, but full of recognition. Then Ethan turned toward her and, unexpectedly, asked, "Do you miss who you were before life got in the way?" Layla swallowed. "I miss the version of me who believed everything was possible, who thought purpose alone was enough to build a future. And now? Now I know better. Or maybe you just know more." She studied his face, unsure whether to laugh or cry. There was nothing flirtatious in his tone, nothing staged, just two people standing in the wreckage of old dreams, trying to salvage something usable. Then she did something impulsive. She pulled the folded napkin from her coat pocket and handed it to him. He unfolded it, held it to the light, and studied her sketch without comment. She waited, her stomach twisting, until he finally said, "Why aren't you designing for someone?" "Because life doesn't come with recommendations when you're poor and black and female. I got degrees, not doors." He didn't argue, didn't deflect. Instead, he folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his inside pocket. "Doors can be rebuilt," he said. The next day, she was reassigned to help in the East Wing. Margaret didn't explain, just handed her a revised schedule, tight-lipped as always. But Layla noticed a faint trail of potting soil across the floor when she entered the hallway outside Ethan's private office. A small mess, deliberately left. A breadcrumb. Inside the office, Ethan stood by a wide table covered in blueprints and topographical maps. On the far wall, an enormous model of a city glowed with miniature streetlights. "Come in," he said, without turning. "I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. I requested you." That stopped her. He glanced over his shoulder, expression unreadable. "I want to show you something." She stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. In that moment, the air was thick with potential, and the world narrowed to one impossibly still room. Layla Brooks realized she hadn't simply been hired to clean. She'd been invited into something far more dangerous. A man's inner sanctum. And perhaps, the beginnings of something neither of them was ready to name. Layla hadn't known that a man like Ethan Calloway could deliberately inhabit silence. He didn't avoid conversation. He preferred to speak only when the words carried weight. But when he did speak, it was with a kind of precision that felt almost architectural, like his thoughts were carefully built before they were offered aloud. That day in the East Wing blurred into something that felt neither professional nor personal, but somewhere in between, a liminal space suspended between what they were and what they might be. Ethan had pulled out 2 stools beside the long slate-topped table, and for hours they hovered over topographical maps, renderings, and pencil sketches. To Layla's quiet astonishment, some of those sketches bore his signature. "You drew these?" she asked, tracing a line on the edge of a schematic with the pad of her finger. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Only rough outlines. The engineers refine everything. But the core, This idea of layered green roofing and vertical food gardens is yours? His gaze met hers. Not mine anymore. Once an idea leaves the mind, it belongs to whoever believes in it enough to make it real. There was something about how he said it, like he was talking about more than buildings. Layla leaned in, examining a series of diagrams showing modular housing arranged in concentric community clusters. Her voice lowered as she murmured, "This looks like something I sketched during my fellowship year." "I know." She blinked. "You know?" "I read your final project submission. Twice." She sat back slowly. "You dug into that after seeing a napkin sketch?" "I did." A pause. "And I haven't stopped thinking about it since." For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Gratitude felt too small. Suspicion felt too defensive. So she settled on the only truth she could offer. "I haven't stopped thinking about it either." They didn't talk about why she'd ended up in housekeeping, or how many firms had passed her over, or how many times she'd wondered if talent mattered in a world where access always came before merit. Instead, Ethan did something unexpected. He handed her a pencil. "Redraw it," he said, "but on my table this time." And she did, quietly at first. Her fingers hesitated at the edges of the page, uncertain after so long. But once the lines began to form, they flowed with the rhythm of someone who had never honestly stopped dreaming, just paused. Ethan watched, sometimes interjecting with a question, pointing to a possible modification. It wasn't correction. It was collaboration. When she looked up, the winter sky outside had deepened into twilight. The conservatory's soft golden lights glowed from beyond the windows, a warm hush against the dusk. "I should go," she said, suddenly aware of the hour. He nodded, slowly. "My driver will take you." "No, I'm fine." "It's not about fine." She stood anyway. "I don't want to cross any lines." He met her gaze evenly. "You didn't." But something passed between them in that moment. Unspoken, unmistakable. An awareness. Not desire in the usual sense, not flirtation, but something quieter and more profound. A recognition of selves long hidden behind roles, histories, and walls. When Layla stepped out into the cold evening air, she felt the wind press against her face like a question she couldn't yet answer. The next morning, she arrived early, earlier than necessary. The conservatory was still dark, wrapped in a blue-gray stillness. She turned on the lights one by one, illuminating the space with soft, amber warmth. And there, on the central table, sat a single object, her napkin sketch, mounted beneath glass, framed in oak. Layla stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The next time she saw Ethan, she didn't mention it, and neither did he. But the weight of that gesture, its elegance, its quiet endorsement, settled in her chest like a secret she didn't want to let go of. They fell into a rhythm after that. Not daily conversations, shared lunches, or casual small talk, but something more subtle. A glance as she passed the corridor. A shared silence in the conservatory while pruning ivy. The occasional brush of shoulders as they leaned over a blueprint. It was intoxicating in its restraint and maddening in its ambiguity. Then came the afternoon, and she found herself outside his study with an envelope in hand. She'd drafted a design proposal, a small one, for a community-led housing block in Brooklyn, built around green alleys and rainwater gardens. It was rough. It wasn't finished. But it pulsed with intention. She knocked. Once. Lightly. His voice came from within, low and focused. "Come in." He was at his desk, sleeves rolled, pen in hand, surrounded by blueprints and chaos. But when he looked up and saw her, the room shifted. "I have something," she said, suddenly aware of the distance between the door and his desk. He stood, rounding the desk, before she had to take another step. She handed him the envelope. "Just an idea." He opened it in silence, pulling out the folded drawings, his eyes scanning the lines with practiced clarity. Layla stood still, trying not to show how much her heart was racing. When he looked up, something warm flickered across his face. "This isn't just an idea," he said quietly. "It's a beginning." Layla felt her breath catch, and for the first time since stepping into Hawthorne Ridge, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't about survival. It was about becoming. And standing there, in the half-light of Ethan Calloway's study, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the door she thought was locked had always been waiting for her to knock again. The invitation arrived not in the form of words, but through gesture. Late one evening, as Layla was preparing to leave the conservatory, her palms still faintly scented with eucalyptus from the leaves she'd tended, Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression as unreadable as ever. "Mr. Calloway has requested your assistance tomorrow evening," she said, her tone clipped and cool. Layla blinked, caught mid-motion. "Assistance? With what?" "The Calloway Foundation Gala. You'll be expected to help manage final arrangements before guests arrive. Formal attire will be provided. The dress will be waiting in the guest suite upstairs." Margaret paused. "You have 1 hour to prepare after your shift ends." Layla opened her mouth to ask a question, but Margaret was already gone. She stood there a moment longer, alone in the greenhouse twilight, pulse quickening for reasons that had nothing to do with logistics. The next day passed in a quiet haze of preparation. She cleaned floral arrangements until her fingers tingled from handling thorned stems, adjusted lighting settings that cast warm golden hues across the ballroom, and triple-checked guest seating arrangements with the precision of someone trying hard not to think about the dress waiting upstairs. By the time the sun dipped below the city skyline, the estate had transformed. The gala began as a flicker of activity, the hush of valets lining up luxury cars, the murmur of designers and donors arriving with practiced elegance. A low hum of strings filled the hall. Staff moved like shadows behind curtains, adjusting final details under chandeliers that shimmered like constellations trapped in crystal. Layla retreated upstairs as instructed. The guest suite smelled faintly of jasmine and beeswax polish. On the bed, laid out like a promise, was a dress the color of midnight. She stepped into it slowly, the satin cool against her skin. It was unlike anything she'd worn before. Cut to glide over her hips, drape elegantly at her collarbone, and fall with quiet grace just above her ankles. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a housekeeper. She saw the version of herself she used to imagine. Before grief, bills, and the weight of constantly being underestimated.
After.
When she descended the stairs, a hush rippled through the crowd. It wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no spotlights. Just a stillness, like a collective inhaling of breath. Conversations faltered. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. Ethan was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, framed by lights spilling from the ballroom behind him. His tuxedo was midnight black, tailored within an inch of architectural perfection. But it wasn't the suit that caught her breath. It was how he looked at her. Not startled, not admiring, certain. "Miss Brooks," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the string quartet. "You look—" But he didn't finish the sentence, as if any word would do. "Thank you for the invitation," Layla replied, hoping her voice didn't shake. He extended his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request, not quite a command either. More like a thread stretched between them, waiting to be followed. She took his hand, The orchestra shifted seamlessly into a slow waltz, and Ethan guided her onto the marble floor. Around them, couples danced in practiced formation, but the space cleared as they moved. Layla felt the warmth of his palm against her back, the steady rhythm of his breath, the quiet authority in every movement. "Everyone's staring," she murmured. "Let them," he replied, eyes fixed on hers. "You've given them something worth staring at." The chandeliers swayed slightly above them, refracting gold across her skin. They moved like they'd done this 100 times, like the music had always been written for the two of them. She followed his lead without hesitation, and momentarily forgot everything beyond that circle of light. The world narrowed. Just him, just her, and something neither dared name. Chapter. Later, they stepped outside onto the back terrace, where the night air was cool and wrapped in the scent of jasmine vines blooming along the stone balustrade. The garden below shimmered in lantern light. In the distance, the skyline blinked like a promise. "Why me?" Layla asked quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. He turned to face her. "You think I haven't asked myself the same thing?" "And?" "I've built companies, Layla. I've sat in rooms with men who run countries, but no one's ever looked at me the way you do." He paused. "Not like a man, just as someone worth knowing." She searched his face, unsure whether to hold that confession gently or run from it. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, "but it doesn't feel like anything I've known before." "It isn't." There was a pause, a breath between words. Ethan's hand lifted, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "When I'm near you, the noise quiets," he said. "The weight I carry, expectations, legacy, performance, it lessens. And when I leave," she asked softly, "it returns." The moment stretched. She stepped back, unsure, trying to steady herself against the storm of whatever this had become. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I know," he replied, "but you act like you do." "No," he said, "I act like I've found something rare. And I'm not used to rare things staying." He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel his warmth, the certainty beneath his hesitations. "Stay," he said, not pleading, not demanding, just a quiet ask in the dark. She looked away, afraid of what would happen if she answered, and more afraid of what might happen if she didn't. The music inside shifted. The sound of champagne glasses, laughter, distant applause. But out here, beneath the soft glow of lanterns and stars, it was just two people, one used to controlling everything, the other used to fighting for anything, standing on the edge of something they didn't understand. Maybe it wasn't love. Not yet. But it was no longer just silence either. It was sound becoming shape, and that was enough for now. In the days following the gala, the estate hummed with a quieter energy. The staff spoke in soft tones about the night, about donors and dancers, about the chandelier that flickered just once, and the governor's wife, who nearly spilled her wine. But beneath those whispers was another story, unspoken, but thick in the air. The way Ethan Calloway had looked at the woman in the midnight blue dress. Layla resumed her routine as if nothing had shifted. She arrived at sunrise. She cleaned the conservatory. She moved through the grand halls like she always had, with quiet purpose, with hands that worked, not wandered. But the rhythm had changed. She caught herself listening for footsteps that didn't come, for his voice, low and deliberate, for the way he lingered in doorways, as if unsure whether to enter or leave. But Ethan had kept his distance since that night. He hadn't called for her, hadn't left messages, hadn't appeared in the conservatory's morning light like he used to. And yet, she felt him everywhere. In the careful folding of the napkin sketch, it is still mounted beneath glass, His favorite herb was the scent of rosemary drifting from the kitchen garden. In the memory of his hand resting at her waist, steady as if it belonged there. It would have been easier if he'd ignored her, but he hadn't. He'd looked at her like she was gravity, and then he'd vanished like a man afraid of falling. One evening, she stayed later than usual. The day had been long, the weather bitter and restless. Snow had begun to drift across the garden path outside the conservatory, soft and aimless. Inside, she wiped down the glass panes slowly, deliberately, letting her mind drift to nowhere. Until a voice stirred the air behind her. "You're still here." She turned. Ethan stood in the threshold, his coat draped over one arm and his scarf loose at his collar. His hair was damp from the snow. There were circles beneath his eyes, darker than usual, but something about the fatigue made him look more real, more reachable. "I lost track of time," she said. He nodded, stepping inside. "So did I." Layla returned to her task, cloth in hand. She didn't know what to say. Every word felt either too much or not enough. "You've been avoiding me," she said, finally. His silence was answer enough. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "If that night was a mistake, you could have just said so." He exhaled slowly. "It wasn't." "Then why pull away?" "Because I didn't trust myself not to cross a line you haven't invited me to." She faced him fully now, letting her clothes drop to the table. "I don't need protecting, Ethan." "I know," he said, voice rougher now. "But I do." She stared at him, uncertain. "There's something about you," he said, "that silences the noise, that makes the chaos manageable. But it also undoes me." He stepped closer, not touching her, not yet, but close enough that she felt the heat of his body warming the space between them. "I built everything I have by staying in control," he said quietly. "And you make me forget to be careful." Layla's heart pressed upward into her throat. She should have moved, should have spoken. Instead, she whispered, "I forget too." It was not a confession. It was a surrender. His hand lifted, slowly, as if asking permission, and when his fingers brushed her cheek, the world tilted, not with drama, but with the gentle recognition of something that had always been there, waiting. "I don't want to rush this," he said, thumb grazing her skin. "But I also can't pretend anymore that you're just a part of my house." She closed her eyes, letting herself lean slightly into his palm. "And I can't keep pretending I'm just passing through." A beat of stillness. Then he kissed her, not urgently, not with hunger, but with the aching reverence of a man who had waited long to feel something honest. Her hands found his collar, his arms folded around her waist. The kiss deepened slowly, like a song they'd both forgotten the melody, but somehow remembered how to sing. By the time they pulled apart, breathless but grounded, the snow outside had thickened. The world had gone quiet. "I should go," she said, barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, but didn't let her go. His forehead rested lightly against hers. "Will I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "You always do," she answered. Later that night, Layla stood in her small apartment, still wrapped in the scent of the conservatory, citrus blossoms, soil, the faint warmth of something blooming out of season. She placed her hand gently over her chest. She hadn't been looking for a love story. She hadn't been looking at all. But something had found her anyway. Not in grand gestures, not in declarations, but in glances that lingered too long, in silences that spoke louder than sound, in the fragile spaces between hesitation and hope. And for the first time in years, Layla Brooks let herself believe. Maybe this wasn't just a chapter. This could be the beginning of a story that would finally be hers. The winter air in New York had taken on that peculiar stillness that came just before snow. Outside Layla's apartment window, the city slowed beneath a pale gray sky, and even the usual sirens seemed softened, distant. Inside, time moved differently, slower, heavier, more deliberate. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other holding a slim white stick with two pink lines staring back at her. It hadn't been planned, not even imagined. It was supposed to be nothing, just fatigue from the long gala week, stress from a new round of project pitches, too much black coffee, and insufficient food. But her body felt strange and slightly off, and when her calendar reminded her that she was 4 days late, she bought the test without telling anyone. Now, the result sat quietly in her palm. Positive. Layla hadn't realized she was holding her breath until her lungs protested. She let it out in a slow stream, placing the test on the counter as if it might combust in her hand. She was pregnant. The thought echoed in her mind, hollow and loud and strangely still. Pregnant, with Ethan Calloway's child. A rush of emotion bloomed inside her. Terror, disbelief, something like awe. And beneath it all, a trembling tenderness she wasn't ready to look at too closely. Her phone vibrated from the kitchen. A message from Ethan. Dinner tonight? My place. Just us. No expectations. Just space. Layla stared at the screen. She had no idea how to reply. That evening, she arrived at Hawthorne Ridge wrapped in silence. The estate looked unchanged, still adorned with the last remnants of winter, the ivy vines frozen mid-climb, the windows dusted with condensation. Ethan met her at the front entrance, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said, stepping back to let her in. She nodded. "You asked." They walked in silence through the west wing. The house was tranquil, and the staff seemingly vanished. In the kitchen, soft music played, something low and melodic. A table had been set with linen napkins and 2 crystal glasses. But Layla couldn't focus on any of it. Not the wine he poured. Not the roasted chicken that steamed gently on the platter. Not even the soft flicker of candlelight dancing between them. All she saw was the weight of the thing she hadn't said. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Ethan looked up, alert but calm. "You can tell me anything." She hesitated. "I'm pregnant." The words landed between them like glass shattering across stone, soundless but irrevocable. For a moment, he didn't react. His fork hovered mid-air. Then, slowly, he set it down and pushed his plate away. "How far along?" he asked. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. He leaned back slightly, absorbing it. "You're sure?" Layla nodded once. "And you're certain it's—" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "I haven't been with anyone else." He ran a hand through his hair, fingers tense. "I didn't mean to question that. I just— God." "Okay." He stood and began pacing, one hand at the back of his neck, the other clenched by his side. "I don't know what you're thinking," Layla said, "and I don't expect anything from you." He stopped mid-step. "Don't say that. It's true. I can do this." "No," he cut in, his voice soft but fierce. "Don't reduce what we've built into something I'm allowed to walk away from." Layla swallowed, unsure what to do with the emotion rising in his voice. "This wasn't planned," she said. "No," he agreed, stepping closer. "But I'd be lying if I said I haven't imagined what it would be like to build something with you." He paused. I just thought I'd have more time. To prove to you I was worthy of that kind of future. Her breath caught. Ethan took her hands, slowly, reverently. You've changed my life, Layla. Not by this. He gestured toward her abdomen, but by seeing me. I never showed anyone the version of me. I don't want you to raise a child alone, and I don't want to live this life without you. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. You don't have to say this. Not because of a baby. I'm not, he said firmly. I've been wanting to ask you something for weeks. I didn't have the courage. He dropped to one knee without hesitation. Her heart stilled. I don't have a ring on me. I didn't expect this tonight, he said, looking up at her. But I've been carrying the question longer than I realized. A pause. Marry me. Layla's breath left her in a rush. You're serious? I'm always serious with you. She pressed a hand to her lips, overwhelmed. This is happening so fast. I know, he whispered. But what I feel for you, it's the only thing in my life that makes sense without a business plan. She laughed, breathless. And then she cried. And then, softly, she said yes. No grand gesture, no applause. Just her hand in his hair, her forehead against his, and the quiet, steady thrum of something new taking root. Later, they sat in the conservatory, blanketed in silence. Snow drifted gently outside, clinging to the panes like lace. Ethan had pulled her close, her head resting beneath his chin. Do you want to know the strangest part? She murmured. What? I don't feel afraid anymore. He kissed her hair. That's how I know this is real. In that moment, they weren't the CEO and a former housekeeper. They weren't architect and empire builder. They were simply two people who'd wandered too long through their solitude, finding shelter in the unlikeliest of places. And now, a new life waited for them. Or for. But that, they didn't know yet. It began with a whisper. A photograph, grainy and half obscured by frost on a limousine window, made its quiet debut on a gossip blog known for little more than bored speculation and bold headlines. But within hours, the story ignited like dry kindling. Tech tycoon's secret love affair with household staff? Beneath the headline, a shot of Layla stepping out of Ethan's car, her coat fastened tightly, her eyes downcast. There was nothing scandalous about it, except the suggestion that her presence in his world was something to question. By morning, it was everywhere. Clickbait headlines bloomed like weeds. From maid to mistress? The real power behind Calloway's throne? Is Ethan Calloway about to become a father? Layla found out the same way most people did, through her phone. The notification buzzed while she was sipping tea at the kitchen table, still in Ethan's shirt, the scent of bergamot lingering in the steam. At first, she thought it was a work alert. Then her eyes caught the image. Her fingers went still. Ethan walked in moments later, holding a breakfast tray, his expression unhurried, until he saw her face. What is it? She turned the phone toward him. For a moment, nothing passed between them but silence. Then, he exhaled. I was wondering when they'd come for us. The damage moved quickly. That afternoon, a junior executive at Calloway Industries leaked an internal email to the press. It included one damning line. We need to get ahead of this narrative before the board considers it a risk to investor confidence. A narrative. That's what their relationship had become. A liability to be managed. A story to be spun. Layla stayed out of sight for 2 days. Not because she was ashamed, but because she felt the eyes every time she stepped outside. Cameras. Whispers. People saw only what they'd been taught to see. A young black woman with ambition, standing next to a powerful white man. The equation, to them, was familiar and entirely wrong. On the third day, Ethan called an emergency meeting with his board of directors. Layla didn't attend. She didn't ask what he planned to say. She only saw the set of his jaw when he left the house, the deliberate way he knotted his tie, as if dressing for battle. He returned hours later with wind-blown hair and a quiet storm in his eyes. "Well?" she asked. He slid off his coat and sat beside her on the couch. "They want me to step back, temporarily." Layla's stomach sank. "You're kidding. They say it's about optics, stability, public confidence." "And what did you say?" "I said I'm not stepping away from anything, especially not you." Her eyes welled unexpectedly. "You didn't have to fight for me." "I didn't," he said gently. "I fought for the truth of what we are. That includes you. And them." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside, pages of architectural drafts, sustainability data, and renderings Layla had been working on quietly over the last month. "I told them, you're not just someone I love," he said. "You're the future of our company's next chapter." She stared at him. "Ethan, I want you to lead our new initiative in sustainable urban housing. You've already done the work. You need the title and the platform." Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the folder. "And if they push back?" she asked. He smiled, wry, calm, dangerous in the way only a man holding his legacy like a sword can be. I reminded them I still hold a controlling interest. The official press release came the following week. It was brief, direct, and entirely Ethan. Calloway Industries is proud to announce the appointment of Layla Brooks as Director of Sustainable Development. Ms. Brooks, a Columbia-trained urban designer, brings vision and expertise to our newest initiative, building equitable, eco-conscious housing across underserved urban areas. Mr. Calloway and Ms. Brooks are also delighted to confirm they are expecting a child together. They request privacy and kindness as they prepare for this new chapter of their lives. It didn't end the noise, but it changed the tone. The backlash was loud, but so was the support. Young architects, particularly women of color, flooded Layla's inbox with messages of hope and admiration. Urban planning forums debated her blueprints instead of her personal life. A respected sustainability journal called her proposal a needed collision between empathy and infrastructure. Still, the scrutiny remained. So did the trolls, the whispers, the thinly veiled racism and sexism that dripped through comment sections like poison. Layla learned to stop reading, but one article cut through anyway. Not because it was cruel, but because it was clinical. A legacy think piece. It referred to her as a temporary footnote in a tech giant's biography. Not an architect, not a partner, just a chapter to be skimmed. That night, she sat alone in the conservatory, the air rich with the scent of blooming citrus trees. Her hand rested unconsciously against her stomach. She didn't hear Ethan approach. He only felt his coat's warmth as he draped it over her shoulders. "I read it too," he said. She didn't answer. "They think you're a distraction," he said, sitting beside her, "because they don't know what it means to be a foundation." She turned toward him. "I'm not trying to prove anything. You don't have to," he said, "but sometimes I feel like I'm being reduced to what I represent, not who I am." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "When I met you, I saw someone extraordinary. That hasn't changed. But maybe what they can't understand isn't your ambition or your brilliance. He looked at her. Maybe they can't understand that a man like me could fall so deeply, so completely, for a woman who was never looking to impress anyone. Layla blinked. You fell? Hard, he said. Her hand found his. In the hush of the conservatory, beneath the delicate hum of the greenhouse's heating system, they sat. Two people not trying to be symbols, but simply trying to love in a world that always wanted to rewrite their meaning. There was more to come. Scandals, press, boardroom power plays. But that night, with his coat on her shoulders and her hand against her belly, all that mattered was this. She was no longer surviving someone else's narrative. She was beginning her own. The snow had melted by the time spring crept cautiously across the edges of the Calloway Estate. Trees that had once stood brittle and bare were now budding with minor, defiant signs of life. Petals curled tight like secrets, branches stretching upward, as if reminding the world that growth comes slowly and only after the cold. Inside the estate, Layla moved differently now. Not just because of the growing weight she carried beneath her ribs, though that, too, had begun to shape her pace, but because something else had shifted. A deeper weight, a quieter ache, a sense that while her body carried new life, her name carried the burden of thousands of assumptions. The media hadn't rested. Not after the announcement, not after her new role. They had dissected every public appearance, every word in every press release, every archived image of her from college debate teams and student protests. They had combed through public records, noted her scholarships, her internships, and her late mother's death certificate. But the cruelty wasn't in what they uncovered. It was in what they chose to invent. One headline appeared on a primary gossip site the morning she was scheduled to present her urban housing initiative at a national sustainability forum. Gold digger legacy? The truth about Layla Brooks's family scandal. Beneath it, grainy photographs of her mother, dressed in a faded hospital uniform. A caption that read, "Sources confirm her mother was accused of theft during her time at a private care facility. Allegedly committed suicide before facing charges." Are the apple and the tree so far apart? Layla stood in the bathroom that morning, one hand gripping the edge of the sink, the other pressed protectively against her belly. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She had become used to headlines. But this was something else. This was desecration. Ethan found her barefoot and motionless in the conservatory 2 hours later, standing beneath a flowering vine whose blooms had opened overnight. Sunlight streamed through the glass in soft shafts, brushing across her skin like water. She didn't look up when he entered. He didn't speak, not at first, just padded to her side. "They found her," Layla said softly. "I saw," he answered. "They twisted her worst days into a headline." "I know. She worked double shifts while dying," she continued, voice thin, "and they reduced her to a rumor. A ghost. A warning." Her hands curled slightly. "I didn't even know she'd been accused of anything," she whispered. "She never told me. She just kept saying she was tired. And sorry." Ethan reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You don't owe anyone an explanation. They think I inherited shame. They're wrong. They want me to feel unworthy of you. They're terrified you never needed me to begin with." Layla turned to him, finally, eyes glassy but defiant. "Then let them be terrified." The forum that day was full of white collars and polite applause, bright lights and subtle judgment. Ethan stayed in the background, seated in the final row, watching her walk to the podium with the quiet composure of someone who had weathered worse storms than public scrutiny. Layla didn't read from the notes prepared by the communications team. She didn't recite safe lines or sanitized sound bites. Instead, She began like this. My name is Layla Brooks. I am an urban designer, a daughter, a future mother, a woman raised by someone who scrubbed hospital floors while teaching me the names of every flower that could survive without sunlight. She paused, letting silence settle. They say I don't belong here, that I earned this platform through proximity instead of merit. I entered a world that was never meant for someone like me. Another pause. Maybe they're right about one thing. I did step into a world that wasn't built for me, so I decided to build something else. She clicked the first slide, and the auditorium lit up with renderings, soft, intentional designs of affordable eco-housing projects that place dignity at the center of urban infrastructure. Walkable green courtyards, rain-harvesting roofs, playgrounds without fences, homes with light. My mother once said, she added, that survival isn't enough. We're meant to shape the spaces we occupy, not just endure them. The room was still. Ethan, in the back row, watched as something quiet and magnificent unfolded. She didn't command the room. She changed it. By the time she finished, the standing ovation came not with fanfare, but reverence, like everyone had suddenly remembered what it meant to believe in something that wasn't just profitable, but human. Back at the estate that evening, Layla stood before the mirror in their shared bedroom. Her reflection dimmed in twilight. Her belly had begun to round. It is not yet visible under sweaters, but it is unmistakable in profile. Ethan entered quietly, watching her from the doorway. You did that, he said. Not despite your past, but because of it. She turned to face him. I want them to know who she was. They will. I don't want her remembered by a headline. Then we rewrite it. He stepped closer. I've spoken with legal, he said. The accusations against your mother never held. The man who filed them was under investigation for harassment. The files were sealed, not to protect him, but to protect you. Her breath caught. You found that out? I found everything, he said, voice low. And if you want, we'll take it public. She looked down, then slowly nodded. Yes. The next morning, a quiet op-ed appeared in The Atlantic. It didn't trend on Twitter. It wasn't dissected on cable TV. But it told the truth. About a woman who worked through illness to keep her daughter fed, who died before justice could reach her, and about the daughter who rose in a world that mistook her strength for scandal. Layla didn't check the comments. She didn't need to. The world might still see what it wanted. But she knew who she was. She knew who her mother had been. And with Ethan beside her, always steady, always listening, she knew one other thing. She wouldn't carry shame into motherhood. She would carry a legacy. One that began long before the headlines, and would last long after. Spring had fully arrived by the time the first blueprint was approved. Layla stood on the edge of a gravel-covered lot in East Brooklyn, watching the morning sun pool over steel foundation beams. She wore a hard hat and boots 2 sizes too big. Her coat zipped halfway against the sharp wind. Her fingers rested lightly over her growing belly, steady and warm. Behind her, a sign had gone up just an hour earlier. Calloway Community Housing Project. Designed by Layla Brooks, Director of Sustainable Development. The letters looked almost surreal in the morning light, real but unfamiliar. A woman from the city's housing department had come by earlier to shake her head. A young black girl in a school uniform had passed with her father, asking if she could one day live in one of the houses that don't all look the same. Layla had smiled and crouched low, showing the child a drawing from her sketchbook. Curved corners, rooftop gardens, window seats wide enough to nap in. They're made for you, she said softly. Back at Hawthorne Ridge, the estate hummed with quiet preparation. Layla's pregnancy had begun to settle into its second trimester, and the daily rituals of anticipation came with it. Mornings meant small sips of ginger tea, and late nights meant soft music and the gentle rhythm of Ethan's fingers, tracing patterns across her back. He was different now, not softer, but more attentive, more attuned. His work schedule bent around her, not with reluctance, but with intention. Board meetings were held remotely when they could be, and they were postponed when necessary. The Eastern Parlor had been turned into a makeshift nursery workshop, fabric swatches, crib design mock-ups, and a low whiteboard where they wrote name ideas in erasable ink. And still, Layla worked. She held meetings from their study, built a digital archive of inclusive housing policies, and met with community organizers in borrowed conference rooms. She returned home each night with swollen ankles and ink-smudged fingers, but always with eyes that burned with purpose. Sometimes, Ethan would watch her sleep, one hand cradling the life inside her and the other resting beneath her cheek. And he'd think, not for the first time, that this woman had turned his empire inside out without ever once raising her voice. Then came the storm, not of wind or rain, but of politics. It began quietly. An anonymous email leaked to a watchdog publication. It claimed that Layla had been hired due to intimate proximity to Ethan, that her appointment bypassed standard vetting procedures, and that the sustainable housing project was a vanity cover for nepotism. The article was careful with its words, but vicious in its subtext. Layla read it once, then again, and then she put her phone down, walked to the kitchen, and stood at the sink for several long minutes, her hands steady, but her eyes hollow. Ethan found her there. She didn't look at him. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "No, you're not," he said softly. Her voice was distant. "I knew they'd come for me again. I didn't think they'd come for the work. They won't win. I'm not worried about winning," she whispered. "I'm tired of defending the ground I already earned." He stepped beside her, cupping her face gently. "You don't need to defend anything. You built this. And still, they say I stole it." "No. They say you didn't ask their permission. That's not the same thing." Doctor. That evening, he made a decision. The next morning, the Calloway Foundation released a statement, not to the press, but as a paid, full-page open letter in 5 major newspapers. It was titled, "Why I Follow Her." A PR team didn't write it. It was in Ethan's voice, signed by his hand. He spoke of legacy, of building companies that changed how cities lived, but never once being changed himself. He spoke of Layla, of how she challenged his assumptions, of how she rebuilt the word home to mean something more than glass and marble, of how her brilliance had never required his name, only his listening. He ended the letter with one sentence. "I did not raise her voice. She raised mine." The effect was immediate. The press pivoted. Journalists turned their attention toward the housing model itself. Op-eds debated the future of urban design. Layla's inbox was filled with interview requests and project inquiries from Philadelphia, Austin, and Nairobi. But none of it changed the simple reality that she had grown used to by now. They would never stop testing her, and she would never stop answering, with buildings, not statements, with structures that held people, not just headlines. One night, after dinner, Ethan brought her out onto the terrace, where the spring air carried the smell of distant rain. The conservatory glowed behind them, the orchid vines lush and blooming. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Do you remember," he said quietly, "what you told me that first morning? About orchids needing connection to thrive?" She smiled faintly. I was mostly trying not to trip over my tongue. Well, you were right. She turned to him, expectant. I spoke to the team today, he said. We're naming the pilot community project in Brooklyn after your mother. Layla stilled. Eleanor Gardens, he said. It felt right. Her breath caught in her throat. I didn't ask for that, she whispered. I know, he said, but she deserves a name that will outlive the lie they told about her. And you deserve to know that no one erases truth because it's inconvenient. She looked up at him, tears brimming. You're sure? I've never been surer of anything. And when she leaned into him, burying her face against his chest, he held her with both arms wrapped around her as if shielding something sacred, which, in truth, he was. Later that night, as they lay in bed, with her head on his shoulder, and his fingers gently tracing idle circles over the curve of her belly, Ethan spoke again, soft but certain. There's something I haven't told you. What's that? At the gala. The first night I kissed you. He paused, his voice growing quieter. I knew. Knew what? That I wouldn't come back from it. Layla turned toward him, her cheek pressed to his chest, her eyes half closed. Then why'd you kiss me anyway? He smiled into the dark. Because I wanted a life I didn't need to escape from. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Her fingers found his hand and folded over it. And in the room's hush, beneath a ceiling they had not designed but had made their own, two hearts beat in rhythm, slow, steady, and unafraid. It began, as most intrusions do, with the sound of footsteps that didn't belong. Layla was in the nursery, still half under construction, sorting through fabric swatches in soft earth tones. Her fingers hovered over a bolt of sage green linen when she heard Margaret's voice just outside the door. She's resting, the house manager said, tight-lipped and cool. I won't take long. Layla stiffened. She knew that voice, elegant, controlled and brushed in an entitled sweetness that always felt like it came with an edge. Elizabeth Crane, Ethan's former executive assistant, and for years, the woman the board had quietly hoped he'd marry. Layla straightened, her hand settling unconsciously over the swell of her stomach, now impossible to disguise. The twins, she'd learned it was two girls, had begun moving more often, their flutters soft but insistent, as if reminding her they were always listening. The door opened without a knock. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, her camel-colored coat immaculate, hair coiled in a perfect twist, lips painted the color of polished coral. She didn't enter right away, just took in the scene. The soft light filtering through gauze curtains, the cradle in the corner, the woman in leggings, and an oversized sweater holding scraps of cotton like they were sacred. You're glowing, Elizabeth said, in a tone that almost passed for kind. Layla didn't smile. Wasn't aware we had anything to discuss. I thought you'd appreciate some perspective. Elizabeth walked in now, uninvited but unavoidable. She belonged. She circled the nursery slowly, inspecting a set piece in a stage play. Did you know, she said idly, that this room used to be Ethan's father's study? Before it was converted to a storage suite, it held over 2,000 rare books. Some first editions. I'm aware, Layla replied. Elizabeth stopped by the window, facing the gardens. Her reflection hovered in the glass, almost ghost-like. You've made yourself very comfortable here, she said. Layla turned, her voice even. Is that what you came to say? Elizabeth faced her then, and this time the mask slipped just slightly. I came because you've become a liability. Layla arched an eyebrow. To whom? To everyone who's spent years preserving this brand. Ethan's name isn't just personal. It's infrastructure, investment, futures. You think the board will let it all be redefined by a woman who showed up as household staff? The words didn't land the way Elizabeth intended. Layla didn't flinch. She only studied the woman before her, realizing for the first time that someone was afraid beneath the expensive wool and the polished tone, not of Layla specifically, but of what she represented. A shift, a new story, a threat to the narrative they had all so carefully kept in place. You can tell the board, Layla said softly, that they're welcome to define legacy however they want. But I didn't build mine for their approval. Elizabeth tilted her head, a mocking smile playing at the corner of her lips. Of course not. You built it from Ethan's bed. Layla moved then, not aggressively, not even defensively. Just one step forward, slow and deliberate, until their silence felt like gravity. You don't see me, Layla said. You never did. That's your mistake. You thought this was about replacing you. Elizabeth's lips tightened. But you were never in the space I now occupy. Layla continued, her voice unshaking. You stood beside him. I walk with him. That's the difference. The air between them buzzed. And then Elizabeth laughed, not with amusement, but with disbelief. She turned on her heel and walked to the doorway. You're playing a dangerous game, she said, and I promise it won't end quietly. Before Layla could respond, she was gone. The door closed behind her with a soft click. That night, Layla didn't mention the visit to Ethan. Not at dinner, not during their walk through the garden, where he wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and asked if the twins had kicked today. Not even when they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her belly as they listened to the rain slide against the windows. Because some battles aren't fought on shared ground. Some endure quietly and privately until they lose their power. But the next day, the blow came. Not in words, in numbers. A board memo was leaked to shareholders, anonymous sources. Phrases like executive impropriety, unvetted appointments, and potential risk to stakeholder trust. By afternoon, the company's stock had dipped. By evening, the calls started. News outlets, investors, sponsors of the foundation. Layla sat at the dining room table, staring at the same sentence in an email for 20 minutes without pressing reply. She'd seen this before, this soft, professional unraveling. It always began with the same line. We're reviewing our partnership for alignment. When Ethan returned from a press call, she was still there, laptop open, untouched tea beside her. They want you out, she said, without looking up. He didn't respond immediately, just stood behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. I won't let that happen. You may not have a choice. I do, he said, and so do you. She turned slowly, her voice low. What if I stepped back, just until the babies are born, just until the noise quiets? His eyes searched hers, and what would that teach them? She was quiet. That their mother should shrink to make others more comfortable? That brilliance waits for permission? Her hands dropped to her lap. You asked me once, he continued, why I kissed you, why I risked everything. He crouched beside her now, eye level, his palms gently covering hers. It wasn't a risk, he said. It was a return. To the part of me that remembered what matters. Layla blinked, her throat thick. Then what do we do now? He stood and smiled. We remind them what we're building. That weekend, they hosted a press conference, not in a ballroom or boardroom, but at the construction site in Brooklyn, where the first walls of Eleanor Gardens had begun to rise. There was no teleprompter, no gilded stage, just concrete, wind, and scaffolding. And a woman in a hard hat, standing next to the man who once thought legacy was measured in spreadsheets. Layla stepped to the mic. "My name is Layla Brooks. I'm not here to defend my role. I'm here to live it." Behind her, workers continued laying the foundation. Each brick is a rebuttal. Each beam is a declaration. And beneath her heart, two girls turned quietly in the dark, listening to the world their mother was already shaping for them, word by word, stone by stone. The world moved differently when you were waiting. Layla had come to understand that time no longer followed clocks once your body became a vessel for new life. The minutes stretched longer between doctors' visits. The hours passed in uneven rhythm, some soft and unremarkable, others sharp with sudden discomfort, or the quiet, breathtaking flutter of movement beneath skin. The twins were 31 weeks and growing quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. Her back ached more now. Sleep came in short, broken patches. Her ankles disappeared by noon, and her ribs ached from the gentle but insistent nudges of two girls who seemed to be staking out territory long before arrival. But it wasn't the physical toll that unsettled her most. The quiet fear lived in the edges of the days. What if the world outside was still too loud, too hostile, too full of judgment for them? What if love wasn't enough to shield them? What if she wasn't? It was Margaret who noticed the change first. "You're too pale," she said one morning, standing at the kitchen counter as Layla poured herself a cup of tea. "Your lips are dry, and your hands are shaking." "I'm fine." "You're not," Margaret said flatly. "And I've known you long enough to know when fine means barely holding it together." Layla hesitated, setting the mug down. "I didn't want to say anything. Not yet." Margaret folded her arms, her posture that of someone who had once raised 4 children and managed a household of chaos with a single look. Layla inhaled. "I've been having these spells. Dizzy, short of breath. And sometimes I get this pain, just under my ribs, like everything inside is too tight. Have you told Ethan?" Layla shook her head. "He's preparing for the Global Development Summit next week. If I tell him now, he'll cancel everything. And if you wait?" She didn't answer. Margaret moved to the drawer, pulled out a blood pressure cuff, and wrapped it around Layla's arm with practiced precision. The numbers flashed. Margaret blinked once. "Get your coat." The lights were too bright at the clinic, and everything smelled of antiseptic and lavender. Dr. Patel, their maternal-fetal specialist, arrived 10 minutes later, her brows already drawn together. "Layla," she said gently, "your blood pressure is elevated, and your protein levels are high. That pain under your ribs, that's not muscular. It could be your liver. I'm admitting you." "Admitting me?" Layla echoed, stunned. "For how long?" Dr. Patel offered a calm, clinical smile. "Until your girls are here. We're monitoring you hourly now. Preeclampsia is unpredictable. We're not taking chances." Ethan arrived 30 minutes later, his tie askew and his face pale. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, standing beside her hospital bed. Layla tried to smile. "Because I didn't want to make it real." He took her hand, brought it to his lips. It was real the moment I heard 2 heartbeats. She exhaled, letting herself lean back against the pillows. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. "So am I." And in that moment, their fear was a bridge, not a wall, something shared. something weathered together. The following 2 days unfolded slowly. The hospital room became its world. Some monitors beeped, nurses who smiled gently, and long hours where nothing happened, except the sound of her daughter's heartbeats, amplified through speakers that pulsed with a steady rhythm. Ethan worked from the small armchair beside her bed, his laptop on one knee, his hand never far from hers. They talked in fragments, about baby names, how much a newborn could change a human, what color to paint the nursery ceiling, and whether 2 cribs should face or sit side by side. Sometimes they said nothing at all, just listened, to the sound of life being built inside her, to the quiet truth of partnership forged not in grand declarations, but in proximity, in presence, in breath shared across uncertain nights. On the 3rd morning, Dr. Patel returned with a gentler tone. "The babies are doing well," she said. "Stronger than I expected, but your pressure's still climbing. If it continues into tomorrow, we must consider early delivery." Layla's fingers tightened around the blanket. 32 weeks, she murmured. "They'll be premature," the doctor said, "but they'll be loved. And that counts more than you know." That night, Layla couldn't sleep. She watched the moon cast pale light over the foot of the bed and let her thoughts wander. She thought of her mother, of the way she used to hum while folding laundry, of the quiet strength that lived in her voice, even during the hardest years. She never once told Layla how much she sacrificed. She just lived the sacrifice. Would she be proud of who Layla had become? Would she have sat in this room, held her hand, whispered the songs she used to sing? Would she have forgiven Layla for not being able to protect her legacy sooner? The tears came slowly, not out of sadness exactly, but out of longing for presence, for time, for the impossible chance to tell her, "I remember everything, even the things you thought I didn't." She didn't notice Ethan had woken until she felt the bed shift. He slid in beside her without a word, careful not to disturb the wires, the monitors, the tubes. She turned her face to his chest and felt his warmth surround her. And when she whispered, "What if I'm not enough for them?" he didn't flinch. "You already are, even if I'm terrified. Especially then." They lay that way for a long time, the hum of machines soft around them. 2 hearts inside her, one pressed beside her, and her own tired, but still beating, heart was holding, still choosing this love again and again, even in the quiet, even in the waiting, especially there. The rain came before dawn, not the polite kind that kissed windows and whispered along rooftops, but the type that poured like a long-awaited truth, furious, cleansing, impossible to ignore. Outside Layla's hospital room, the sky shifted from a dull slate to a deep, aching gray. Thunder rolled low and unhurried, like the earth braced for something inevitable. Inside, the monitors beeped in rhythmic defiance of the storm. Layla had barely slept. Her body was heavy with pressure, her breath shallow, her fingers curled around the edge of the sheet with quiet insistence. The twins had been restless all night, kicking and turning, reminding her they were alive and waiting with every movement. Ethan had stayed. He hadn't left her side since the moment they admitted her, sleeping in half-hour snatches on the narrow pull-out bed, answering work calls in whispers by the window, drinking terrible hospital coffee with the kind of grim devotion that came only from love. But this morning was different. The moment he saw her face, he knew. "You didn't sleep." She shook her head. "Pain?" She nodded once. "And something else. I don't know." It's like everything inside me is stretching. Like the space isn't enough anymore. Ethan sat beside her and took her hand. It was warm and damp and trembling slightly. Then Dr. Patel entered, flanked by 2 nurses in teal scrubs. Her expression was kind, but firm. "Layla," she said gently, "your liver enzymes have tripled. Your pressure's rising by the hour. It's time." There was no panic in the room, no shouts, no alarms. Just the quiet shifting of reality, like stepping into water you hadn't realized was deep. "Now?" Layla asked, though she already knew the answer. "We're prepping the OR." She blinked. "C-section? It's the safest option." Layla looked down at her belly, at the rise and fall of it, at the lives it held. And for a fleeting moment, fear caught her by the throat. Ethan saw it. "Hey," he whispered, brushing a curl from her forehead. "You've carried them this far. Now let us carry you." She swallowed, nodded, and squeezed his hand tighter.
Chatham.
The lights in the operating room were sterile and blinding. The air was sharp, and there was antiseptic and cold confidence. Nurses moved quickly but gently, talking in practiced rhythms. Dr. Patel stood at her shoulder, her voice soft, explaining every step as it came. "You'll feel pressure, not pain," she said. "We'll be quick. They're ready." Layla nodded, her breath shallow. Ethan was beside her, dressed in blue scrubs and a surgical cap. His eyes locked on hers with a quiet desperation that belied the stillness in his voice. She wanted to say 100 things. That she wasn't ready. That she wished her mother were here. That she was terrified of holding something so small and being responsible for all of it. But none of those words came. Only this. "Will they cry?" Ethan leaned in and kissed her temple. "They will." And then the pressure came. A pull, a tremble, the strange weightlessness of surrender, a pause, and then a cry, thin, shrill, miraculous. Then another, like an echo. The sound was unbearable and beautiful all at once. Ethan's eyes filled. He pressed his forehead against hers. "They're here," he whispered. And just like that, the world rearranged itself. She didn't see them right away. They were rushed to the NICU incubators for oxygen and warmth. Weighing just under 4 pounds each, their lungs still new, their fingers curled in tiny, involuntary fists. But the nurse brought photos, printed on glossy paper, their names written in marker along the edge. Aurora May Calloway, Layla Brooks Calloway. Layla stared at them, at their wrinkled cheeks, furrowed brows, and impossibly delicate limbs. They were real. They were hers. They were here. When the nurse offered to wheel her in, she nodded through tears. The NICU was quieter than she expected. Machines hummed. Heart monitors pulsed. Soft lullabies played on a loop from a distant speaker. Ethan stood beside one of the incubators, a strange mix of awe and helplessness in his posture. He looked up when she entered, and she saw it. His entire center had shifted. His gravity no longer pointed inward but outward, toward 2 impossibly small lives. Layla reached the side of Aurora's incubator, peered through the plexiglass. The baby's eyes were closed. Her chest rose and fell in fast, shallow breaths. A knitted cap covered her head. Her skin was translucent, fragile. "I never thought I could love something before touching it," Layla whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched her, as if seeing her again for the first time. A woman who had once scrubbed his marble floors. A woman who now held the core of his future in her trembling hands. Later, back in her hospital room, She lay in a daze, exhausted, raw, changed. Ethan sat in the corner chair, one arm slung over the backrest, watching the rain slip down the window in long silver ribbons. He turned to her, finally. "Do you realize," he said softly, "that nothing about me is the same anymore?" She smiled weakly. "Good. You were overdue." He chuckled, stood, and moved beside her. "They're going to be strong," he said, "and loud, and opinionated, just like you." Layla turned her face toward him. "I hope so. Do you know what I prayed for while you were in surgery?" She blinked. "You prayed?" "I did." She arched a tired brow. "To whom?" He paused. "To whatever part of the universe gave me you." Silence. Then, "I asked for time," he said. "Not money, not power, just time. Enough to watch them grow. Enough to make sure they never doubt what love looks like." Layla closed her eyes, tears spilling freely. "Then we'd better start now," she whispered. And in that quiet room, as the sky wept its joy and grief in equal measure, two people who had once been strangers began to imagine a life built not from fortune or fame, but from the steady, imperfect, miraculous rhythm of staying. The snow arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to interrupt. Outside the Calloway Estate, in upstate New York, flakes drifted past the tall windows like ash from a dream, settling over the roof and gardens in soft layers. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Aurora and Isla were born. 3 weeks of sterile hospital light and whispered prayers, of steady beeping monitors and the rhythmic whoosh of oxygen machines. And finally, today, they were home. Not cradled in the arms of celebration, but ushered in with the kind of reverence reserved for miracles. Layla stood just inside the nursery door, her fingers resting lightly on the frame, as if she needed the grounding. The room had been finished while she was still recovering. Ethan had overseen every detail. Pale rose and dove gray, soft clouds painted on the ceiling, 2 identical cribs beneath the wide bay window. Aurora was asleep in the crib on the left, one tiny hand curled near her cheek. Isla, ever the restless one, had kicked off her blanket and was twitching gently in her dreams. Layla didn't move. Not yet. There was a hush in the room, one of those rare moments when time didn't stretch or shrink, but paused. She hadn't yet allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. Not the fear, not the awe, not even the quiet ache in her chest when she realized she'd brought life into the world and now had to learn how to hold it without breaking. She'd thought motherhood would arrive like a curtain lifted, something grand and immediate. But instead, it had come in fragments, in midnight feedings, in sterilized bottles, in the softness of skin she could barely believe was real, in the quiet terror of wondering whether she was doing any of it right. Ethan stepped into the doorway behind her, his voice low and careful. "You've been standing there for almost 20 minutes. She didn't turn. "I don't want to wake them. They sleep like they were born in a storm," he said with a smile, which they were. He moved beside her, close enough that their arms touched. "They look peaceful," he said. "They're not. Isla keeps punching Aurora in her sleep." He chuckled softly. "She'll be our rebel." Layla folded her arms across her chest, but not from cold. "You ever wonder," she asked, her voice soft, "if we were ready for this?" Ethan didn't answer right away. "I wonder every morning, and I keep wondering until one of them cries, and it doesn't matter anymore, because ready or not, we're here." Layla nodded, eyes still fixed on the twins. You ever think they'll hate us for how we started? He turned to look at her fully now. I think they'll admire us for how we chose to stay. Later, in the still blue quiet of early evening, they sat on the nursery floor, backs resting against the wall, both girls asleep again, this time on their parents' chests. Aurora lay curled against Ethan's shoulder, her breath tiny and even. Isla clung to Layla's robe with a grip that could have commanded armies. It had become their ritual. No matter how chaotic the day was, no matter how many feedings, board calls, or doctor's check-ins, at dusk, they came here. To this room, to the floor, with their daughters against their skin and their silence shared like wine. Ethan reached out and touched Layla's hand where it rested on Isla's back. Did I tell you what my father said the day my sister was born? Layla glanced over. No. He told my mother, everything I've ever built feels small now. Layla exhaled slowly. I understand that, she murmured. But it's not just that things feel small. It's that they feel irrelevant. Ethan nodded. I used to think the pinnacle of success was the number of people who needed me. And now, it's the number of people I want to need me. There was something in the way he said it that made her look at him differently, not as the man who had once hired her, not even as the man who had fallen in love with her during the most impossible chapter of their lives, but as someone who had come undone and chosen to rebuild with her, not around her. The difference, she realized, was everything. The next day brought visitors. Carmen and Julian, Ethan's closest friends from university, godparents in spirit if not yet in ceremony, arrived with gifts wrapped in sustainable brown paper and quiet awe in their eyes. They're perfect, Carmen whispered, peering into the cribs. Julian leaned against the doorframe. And terrifying. I held Aurora for 30 seconds and had an existential crisis. Layla smiled, grateful for the levity. As they moved into the kitchen for coffee, Julian glanced around the house and then back at Ethan. You're different, he said. Ethan arched an eyebrow. Worse or better? Neither, Julian replied. Just softer, like you finally sat down. It struck Layla then, how much she had also softened. Not in weakness, but in weight. She used to carry herself like armor, each choice precise, every glance measured. Now, her movements had more air, her voice more hushed, her eyes less guarded. Motherhood did that, or love did, real love. The kind that showed up when the cameras stopped rolling, when the lights went out, when sleep was scarce, and nothing about life looked like a movie. That night, Layla climbed into bed first. Ethan stayed behind in the nursery, humming a lullaby off-key as he tucked Aurora in again. She watched him from the hallway, unseen. The man who once held power like a shield, now bent over a crib, whispering dreams into the dark. He didn't see her watching. He only kissed his daughter's forehead and turned off the light. And in that moment, something settled in her. Not relief, not even joy. Just peace. Like the quiet after a storm. Like the stillness between heartbeats. Like home. The city outside the estate's glass walls was a swirl of gray and rush. But inside the conservatory, the air was calm, thick with the scent of fresh earth and something new. Layla sat at the long oak table, sketches spread before her like fragile wings. Her eyes traced each line with the same tenderness she had when she first held her daughters. Curves that promised shelter, spaces designed for laughter, for community, for life to take root. Ethan entered quietly, his presence a steadying pulse against the gentle hum of the heating system. "You're up early," he observed. She smiled without looking up. "The girls woke me. I think they sensed the changes." "Changes?" "The project," she said, tapping the drawings. "It's moving faster than I imagined." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "That's good. Good and terrifying." He nodded. "Progress always is." There was a pause. Then she said softly, "Sometimes I wonder if this is more than just architecture. If it's a kind of revolution." Ethan's eyes found hers. "It is. Because it's built from truth." Weeks turned into months. The Calloway Community Housing Initiative became more than a blueprint. It became a promise. Ground was broken on the Brooklyn lot with a ceremony, a gathering of neighbors, city officials, and workers who saw, perhaps for the first time, a vision that included them. Layla stood on a stage beside Ethan, the wind tugging at her coat, the winter chill softened by the warmth of the crowd's welcome. She spoke, not of herself, or even of the project, but of the possibilities that waited in places too long forgotten. "Home," she said, "is more than a roof. It's safety. It's dignity. It's the freedom to dream without fear." The applause came not just from polite society, but from hearts that had known too much uncertainty. At home, the nursery had become a sanctuary. The twins had settled into rhythms that still surprised their parents. Aurora with her solemn gaze, and Isla with bursts of laughter that echoed down the halls. Late nights were a dance of whispered lullabies and soft hands brushing hair. Ethan and Layla shared the duties without hesitation, each finding a partner as fierce as any boardroom adversary in the other. One evening, after a particularly long day, Layla found Ethan in the conservatory, bent over a small plant she'd brought home from a neighborhood nursery, a sapling of a cherry tree. He looked up, startled. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He smiled. "You didn't." She moved closer, feeling the ache of the day lift slightly in his presence. "We were talking earlier," she said, "about revolution." He nodded. "This is ours," she said, gesturing to the sapling. "Not just the housing, but this. Life. Growth. The small things that become everything." Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the delicate pink blossoms. "Do you think it will bloom?" "Only if we nurture it," she replied. He turned to face her fully then. "We'll nurture it," he promised. "Together." The media began to shift its tone. What had once been gossip and scandal slowly gave way to respect and curiosity. Layla was invited to panels, interviews, and private meetings with city planners who listened with genuine interest. Her vision was no longer a footnote. It was becoming a blueprint for change. One afternoon, as she reviewed community feedback forms in their study, Ethan appeared behind her with 2 mugs of tea. He set one down beside her and wrapped an arm around her waist. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "Like everything's happening all at once," she admitted. "And yet," he said, "you're still standing." She leaned into him. "Because I'm not standing alone." They sat together silently, the weight of their journey settling into a shared strength. The challenges were far from over. The world would still test them. But in this quiet revolution, Layla and Ethan had found a truth that no headline could ever capture. A love built not on grand gestures, but on the small, steady acts of faith. On the breath between heartbeats. On the spaces where 2 lives intertwine and create something new. something lasting, something real. The afternoon light filtered softly through the curtains, casting long golden stripes across the hardwood floor of their shared home. Layla sat cross-legged on the living room rug, a heap of baby blankets beside her, the twins gently cooing in their cribs nearby. Her hands rested on the curve of her belly, now undeniably round with the promise of new life. The quiet hum of the house wrapped around her like a warm embrace. Ethan entered carrying a stack of architectural magazines and a notebook filled with scrawled notes. His eyes lit up when they found hers. "You're here early," she said with a smile. He settled beside her, pulling her close. "Couldn't stay away. The new designs keep evolving, and I think I'm addicted to watching you breathe life into them." She laughed softly, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "You know, this isn't just about buildings. It's about legacy. And love," he added, his voice low and sincere. Their fingers intertwined, fingers that had learned the language of comfort in the darkest and brightest moments alike. Outside, the neighborhood thrummed with activity. The Calloway Community Housing Project had become a beacon of hope and resilience, a place where sunlight bathed community gardens and laughter echoed through open courtyards. Families moved in. Children played on swings, handcrafted with care. And neighbors gathered beneath trellises, heavy with jasmine and wisteria. But inside, within the walls of their sanctuary, Layla and Ethan nurtured a different kind of dream. A family. A future. The months unfolded in a rhythm both delicate and fierce. Layla's body carried new life again, and this time the journey felt different, marked by a quieter confidence born from battles fought and won, from love that had taken root against all odds. Ethan stood steadfast beside her at every doctor's appointment, every late-night worry, every whispered hope. One evening, as winter's first snow dusted the world outside, Layla was wrapped in Ethan's arms beside the fireplace. The twins were asleep, their tiny breaths steady and peaceful, and the house hummed with the promise of tomorrow. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she whispered into the flickering firelight. Ethan kissed her temple. "Every day." She looked up, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I used to think that success was measured in numbers and accolades. Now I know it's measured in moments like this." He smiled. "In the quiet triumphs, the small victories, the love that builds beneath the surface." Their wedding was intimate, held beneath the cherry blossoms in the estate's garden, the tree that had once been a sapling in the conservatory. Close friends and family gathered, the air thick with blossoms and promise. Layla wore a gown of ivory silk that flowed like water, soft and graceful, crafted by a designer who understood the beauty of her changing form. Ethan stood beside her, eyes shining with a tenderness reserved only for her. Their vows were whispered secrets, promises carved not in grand declarations, but in truth. "I promise to honor your strength," Ethan said, "to nurture your dreams, and to walk beside you through every season." Layla's voice trembled as she replied, "I promise to build with you a life founded on love, respect, and unwavering partnership." When the rings were exchanged, two bands intertwined, profound yet straightforward, Ethan kissed her fingers. "One for each heartbeat we've shared, and for all the ones to come," he murmured. Life unfolded in the joyous chaos only children can bring. The twins grew alongside their newest siblings, 4 tiny souls weaving their tapestry of laughter, tears, and discovery. The home echoed with footsteps and song, bedtime stories and quiet prayers. Layla and Ethan navigated sleepless nights and spilled milk with a grace forged in hardship and hope. In the boardroom, Layla's vision transformed cities, redefining what it meant to build with heart. Ethan stood proudly beside her, not just as a partner in business, but as a partner in life. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled over the nursery walls, Ethan found Layla watching their children play. He stepped beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked. She smiled, eyes soft. "Every day. And I believe it will be as beautiful as the love we've built." He kissed her forehead gently. "Together, we've laid foundations that no storm can shake." Their children's laughter filled the room, a symphony of life, hope, and endless possibility. And as Layla rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, she knew that the most incredible architecture was the family they had built, one heartbeat at a time. The evening sun melted into a cascade of amber and rose, filtering through the large windows of the Calloway Estate, painting the room with a warmth that seemed to cradle every moment within it. Layla sat nestled in Ethan's arms on the plush couch, the soft murmur of their children's laughter echoing from the nursery, a melody that had become the heartbeat of their home. Years had passed since the first fragile steps of their journey together, the stolen glances in the conservatory, the storm of whispers and doubts, the delicate but fierce love that had defied every expectation. And yet, here they were, not perfect, never perfect, but beautifully whole. Layla lifted her hand, tracing the gentle curve of Ethan's jaw. Her eyes shimmered with all the stories unspoken, the battles fought silently in the night, the dreams nurtured in moments stolen from chaos. "I never imagined this," she whispered. He smiled, voice low and tender. "Neither did I. But I always hoped for a love that felt like home." Their hands intertwined, fingers weaving the quiet promise of forever. Outside, the city lights blinked awake, a sprawling constellation of possibility and hope. Inside, their world held steady, a sanctuary forged not by wealth or power, but by the sacred acts of trust, resilience, and unwavering devotion. Layla's gaze fell to the children playing at their feet, 4 souls born of love and courage, their laughter a testament to the life they had built against all odds. "We built more than houses," she said softly. "We built a legacy." Ethan kissed the top of her head. One heartbeat at a time, as twilight deepened, they rose together, moving toward the nursery to cradle their family in the tender quiet of night. And in that gentle darkness, where dreams take flight and love blooms eternal, they found the truth that had carried them through every trial. The most incredible story ever told is the one we write with each other. Thank you for journeying with Layla and Ethan through their love, strength, and hope story. If their journey touched your heart, please like, comment, and follow for more tales, reminding us of love's transformative power. Your support breathes life into these stories and inspires us to share many more.